The world keeps watching tanks, counting missiles, measuring war in meters of destroyed ground, but the real battlefield has moved, quietly, brutally, into the open sea, because Russia doesn't run on speeches, it runs on cash flow, and Ukraine has found the vein, not a city, not a trench, a system, a floating money machine, the Shadow Fleet, more than 600 tankers pushing up to 7.5 million barrels a day across the world. These ships don't just carry oil, they carry the ability to keep fighting. So the logic flips overnight. Ukraine doesn't need to outgun Russia everywhere. It only needs to choke what funds everything. If this is the war you didn't know you were watching, subscribe now. Because once the money stops moving, history moves with it. Right now it looks like a military story, but it's actually a system story. Ukraine is doing something most wars never attempt. It's attacking the war without attacking the army. Instead of focusing on the front lines, it's focusing on the bloodstream. Because Russia's power today is not just firepower, it's endurance, it's momentum. It's the ability to keep paying the price of war day after day. And that endurance comes from one simple thing: oil money. Not oil as a commodity, oil as liquidity, oil as survival. That's why the Shadow Fleet matters. More than 600 tankers, a moving export machine, a network designed to keep Russia selling when the world says stop. If that network runs freely, Russia's war runs longer. But if that network breaks, the war doesn't just slow down, it changes shape. Because then Moscow faces the question every empire fears. Not can we win, but how long can we afford to exist like this? And once you see it that way, you realize this isn't just Ukraine versus Russia. It's the global economy versus a war funded through invisible lanes. Wars don't begin with explosions. They begin with conditions. And for Russia, those conditions were built over years. A state designed to survive pressure. A war machine designed to outlast outrage. After sanctions tightened, Russia didn't stop exporting oil. It adapted, not through diplomacy, through infrastructure. A parallel system emerged, ships with unclear ownership, routes that bend around restrictions, transactions that don't show up the way you expect. This is not just smuggling, it's economics under siege, because modern power is not only about weapons, it's about moving value, across borders, across oceans, across rules. That's the cycle most people miss. When a nation is isolated, it doesn't simply collapse. It mutates, and the mutation always creates a new marketplace, a darker one, a faster one, a more dangerous one. So by the time Ukraine starts striking at sea, it's not reacting to random ships. It's targeting the hidden architecture that keeps the war alive. And history is full of moments like this, when the battlefield shifts from soldiers to systems, because once a war becomes a financial engine, the most powerful weapon is disruption. And that's exactly what came next. It started like a warning, then it became a pattern, a low-cost strike, a sudden fireball on the horizon, a tanker limping back, damaged, exposed, humiliated. Not a headline that lasts for weeks, a headline that lands like a punch, because the message wasn't subtle. Ukraine wasn't just hitting ships, it was hitting the assumption behind the entire war, that oil exports would keep flowing no matter what. This wasn't traditional warfare, this was pressure engineering. With sea drones, Ukraine could do something terrifyingly efficient, force Russia to defend everything, every route, every port, every floating barrel of revenue. And once that happens, costs explode, insurance shifts, risk premiums rise, captains hesitate. One strike doesn't end the system, but it changes behavior, and in war, behavior is everything. Because when your economy depends on movement, even a small disruption becomes a strategic earthquake. So the first mini-crisis wasn't only damage at sea, It was the moment the world realized Russia's war engine has a soft underbelly, and Ukraine just touched it. Here's what most people misunderstand. The Shadow Fleet isn't just ships avoiding sanctions, it's a financial machine disguised as logistics. Because oil is not only energy, oil is cash flow. And cash flow is what turns a long war into a survivable war. Think of the Shadow Fleet like a moving pipeline, except pipelines are fixed, and ships can reroute, disappear, reappear under a new flag. That flexibility is the mechanism. It's how a sanctioned economy keeps breathing. Now add another layer. Volume. More than 600 tankers moving oil like a global bloodstream. Up to 7.5 million barrels a day worth of export capacity. That doesn't just fund budgets, it stabilizes the regime, pays salaries, buys parts, keeps the state functioning. So when Ukraine strikes at sea, it's not trying to win a battle, it's trying to trigger a cascade. Higher risk, higher cost, lower volume, lower confidence, and that's the real weapon, not the explosion itself, but the fear it injects into the system. Because once the market gets scared, money stops moving. And when money stops moving, wars start dying. Then came the second shock. And this one wasn't symbolic, it was scale, it was persistence, it was pressure applied again and again. Ukraine's sea drones didn't need to destroy everything. They only needed to prove one idea, that these ships are not untouchable. And once that illusion breaks, every tanker becomes a question mark. Every trip becomes a gamble. Every shipment becomes a risk calculation. Because now the Shadow Fleet isn't just moving oil, it's moving under threat. That's when the system starts paying a hidden tax. A tax on confidence, a tax on speed, a tax on volume. In 2025, disruptions hit Russia's energy machine hard. Roughly 17% refining capacity damaged or disabled, exports reduced, revenue pressure building, not because the oil vanished, but because the process became fragile, and fragility is what collapses empires, slowly at first, then all at once. This wasn't a single strike anymore. This was an economic siege, floating on waves, a war of attrition, but not on soldiers, on systems. And when systems break, they break far beyond the battlefield. Now let's bring it back to you. Because wars don't stay on maps. They travel into kitchens, into rent payments, into the price tag on your next week of life. When a tanker burns at sea, it looks distant. But the shock doesn't stay distant. It moves through markets like electricity. Fuel costs shift, shipping costs rise, insurance spikes, and companies quietly pass it forward to you. You don't get a vote on naval strategy, but you pay for the consequences anyway. That's the cruelty of modern conflict. It doesn't need to invade your country to invade your budget. And if you're watching this thinking, why does this matter to my life? Because stability is not a gift. It's a system. And right now that system is under stress. From war, from energy pressure, from uncertainty that multiplies overnight. So here's the real question. How many people can keep living normally while the world's supply chains start behaving like battlefields? If you felt prices tightening around you, comment below. I want to know what you're seeing where you live, because this isn't just their war. It's our world absorbing the impact. Zoom out, because once you understand the Shadow Fleet, you realize this isn't just a Ukraine story. It's a global design problem. A war in one region is being financed through routes that touch everyone. Ports, straits, insurance markets, shipping lanes, and that means every major player gets pulled in, not by ideology, by exposure. Europe wants stability, but it also wants predictable energy pricing. Emerging economies want cheap fuel, but they don't want chaos in trade routes. And the global market wants one thing above all: certainty. Ukraine's strategy weaponizes uncertainty. It turns Russia's export lifeline into a liability. And once that happens, the ripple effects multiply fast. Because shadow shipping isn't just about Russia, it's proof that sanctions don't end trade. They reroute it. And rerouted trade creates new power centers, new brokers, new risks. So the question becomes bigger than war funding. What happens when the world accepts a reality where invisible fleets can fund conflicts indefinitely until someone starts blowing holes in the supply chain itself? That is how regional wars become global turbulence, not through nuclear threats, but through economic contagion. And in 2025, the world is running out of shock absorbers. So where does this go from here? There are three futures, and none of them are comfortable. First, the contained scenario. Ukraine keeps striking selectively, Russia adapts but costs keep rising, the shadow fleet survives, but it bleeds money just to stay moving, the war drags on, slower, heavier, uglier. Second, the fracture scenario. Attacks intensify, insurance collapses, routes reroute again, some ships stop sailing, revenue dips harder, pressure rises inside Russia's system, not just militarily, financially. That's when instability becomes internal. Third, the cascade scenario. One major disruption triggers global panic. Energy prices spike, trade lanes tighten, and governments respond with more force, more controls, more escalation, not because they want to, because the system demands it. Here's the philosophical truth. Modern wars don't end when someone loses. They end when the engine can't afford to run. And Ukraine is trying to break the engine, not with armies, with math, with risk, with pressure that spreads like a virus. In that sense, this isn't just a conflict, it's a preview of the next era of warfare, where the battlefield is the global economy itself. And this is the part that should haunt you, because the shadow fleet was never just a Russian trick. It was a mirror, a reminder that the modern world doesn't run on morality, it runs on systems. If money can move, power survives. If energy can flow, wars can last. If trade can reroute, pressure can be absorbed. Ukraine understood that. And instead of trying to win everywhere, it chose to strike where the future is decided. The cash flow, the confidence, the invisible machinery behind the battlefield. That's why a burning tanker matters more than 1,000 speeches. Because it tells you what kind of world you're living in now. A world where ships are not just ships, they are budgets, they are leverage, they are political oxygen. And if this war becomes the blueprint, then the next conflicts won't be fought for land first. They'll be fought for supply chains, for insurance markets, for energy routes. So the question isn't who wins Ukraine, the question is how many global systems can break before the world finally admits it needs new rules to survive. If you want the next episode where this spreads beyond oil, subscribe now, because the next battlefield might be something you depend on every single day.